Hello there and welcome to today's special talk show dedicated to the National Memory Day, which is the 77th commemoration of May 8th, 1945 massacres. On the eve of the commemoration, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune said in a message to the Algerian nation that this day has witnessed the greatness of the nation's struggle, pointing out that the atrocities witnessed on May 8th, 1945 in Sétif, Guelma, Kharata and other Algerian cities are evidence of heinous massacres, adding that it will remain engraved with its horrific tragedies in the national memory. Today I am honored to host in the show a panel of guests via Skype. We have Abdenour Atoumi, a journalist and Maghreb studies expert at Oursam from Paris, France. Also Manuel Pouchelet, geopolitical analyst and university lecturer from Paris, France as well. Thank you for being with us. And from Algeria, Dr. Mahfoud Ali Zoui via phone, lecturer at Guelma University. Thank you, gentlemen, for accepting our invitation. Those were my guests, and the discussion begins shortly, right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, let's follow this report in which Algeria is commemorating one of its most sensitive episodes of history, May 8th, which is a day that mourns more than 45,000 Algerians who were massacred by the French colonialism in one of the worst war crimes in the history of humanity that will always be in the memory of Algerians to glorify their war of independence as well as their noble resistance.
May 8th marks a special day of glory for the Algerian population, as thousands had rallied in Sétif and all around Algeria, including colonial ruler France. This day marks a hard-won victory in Europe over Nazi Germany. France had promised independence after the win during the Second World War, as Algerian youth participated in the front lines against the Germans, just to obtain their independence from the French ruling. The Algerian population with all its parts went out for celebrating the independence of Algeria, which was automatic after the World War II. Algerians took to the streets as happy to be independent from a long-lasting colonialism, which practiced all types of torture and massacres against unarmed population, which never accepted to be under the French ruling. The celebration soon turned to be one of the worst war crimes committed in the history of the world. French army massacred thousands of mostly unarmed Muslim civilians in one of the massacres mostly known of Sétif Guelma Kharata massacres. The French launched a 15-day campaign of violence, targeting Sétif and the surrounding rural region, bombing villages and hamlets indiscriminately. General Raymond Duval led French authorities' ruthless clampdown, imposing martial law and a curfew on a patch of territory stretching from Sétif to the sea, 50 kilometers north. Nationalist leaders were detained, and villages suspected of harboring mujahideen were strafed by the Air Force and set ablaze. Women, children and the elderly were massacred, and some 44 villages were destroyed in 15 days of retribution, in addition to over 45,000 people who were put to death by the French army and put in mass graves. Executions continued until November 1945, and some 4,000 people were arrested, which was a fuel for the Algerian War of Independence 9 years after. These war crimes, which France always denied, remain a very sensitive episode of Algerians, which will never be healed by time nor with apologies, and it will always be commemorated as part of Algeria's brave history.
Let me begin with you, Professor Abdenour Atoumi. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, sent a message on the occasion of the 77th anniversary of the massacres, stating that the atrocities of Sétif, Guelma, Kharata and other cities witnessed on May the 8th, 1945 will continue to bear witness to heinous massacres which cannot be forgotten. What can you tell us about these massacres in particular and other war crimes in general? Often the French colonialism has been described as brutal and barbaric. How do you see that?
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for having me. Actually, it is the commemoration of May 8th for Algerians. As you showed those pictures and are more than a million words. So in terms of brutality and in a human act, it's very hard to describe those acts. However, on the political level at that moment, for Algerians in general and the Algerian, I would say, political movements, it is a milestone event that shaped decisively the future of the Algerian nation that led, I mean, nine years later to show, the occupation, which was very inhuman, and this harsh occupation went on for, as we all know, a century and 30 years later. But at the same time, it was also a process of acculturation as well. Therefore, to empty the Algerian identity as it is. So now, as far as the again, how to describe those tragic events are very, very, unqualifiable. On the legal aspects, of course, there are some experts on the legal field who will, define the future and the outcome of these events. Therefore, the tragic events.
Very nice.
Consequently, the politicians, notably the French politicians and leaders, moved toward the Algerians in his visit in a pre-election in 2017 as a candidate when he used, he described these events, actually the French occupation as possible. Sure, I would say the solution is plausible, but it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. Coming up next in our discussion. On the eve of the 58th anniversary of its independence, Algeria, colonized by France for 132 years, retrieved the remains of 24 leaders of the popular resistance who were killed in the early years of colonialism and were kept for decades in the Museum of Humanity in Paris. I'll leave you with this report by Zahra Farjani speaking about the retrieval of the remains of 24 leaders of the popular resistance killed in the early years of colonialism.
ستحط بإذن الله في مطار هواري بومدين الدولي طائرات عسكرية قادمة من فرنسا وعلى متنها رفات 24 من قادة المقاومة الشعبية.
With these words, the Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune announced the return of 24 remains of the popular resistance martyrs after they had been held hostage by the Museum of Humanity in Paris for more than 170 years. This step gave the commemoration of the 58th anniversary of independence a special taste and a feeling closer to political victory. Algiers and Paris agreed in December 2017 to permanently end the issue of the martyr skulls during the first official visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to Algeria, but it was postponed due to the tension that characterized the relations between the two countries back then. These skulls dated back to the 19th century for fighters who fell in the field of honor at the beginning of the French colonization of Algeria. Skulls, some of which belong to prominent resistance fighters, including Mohamed Lemjed Bel Abd El Malik, known as Sharif Boubaghla, the Algerian officer Isa Hamadi, Sheikh Bouziane, the commander of the Zaatisha resistance in the Biskra region. By handing over these skulls, Algeria and France were afforded one of the complicated files between them, and France was opposed to handing over the skulls in Paris because they allegedly fall within the French heritage. In recent years, the Algerian authorities and human rights organizations have led pressure campaigns to retrieve the skulls of the martyrs and bury them in a manner worthy of them.
Dr. Mahfoud Ali Zoui, by handing over these skulls, Algeria and France, can we say the two countries would have folded one of the most complicated files between them? What made France oppose to handing over the skulls at the beginning, and are there still other skulls in the museum?
Once again, this is just a symbolic move from the part of Paris. It's a positive, yes, yet symbolic. What we need is a recognition, a formal recognition of the crimes and the atrocities. You know, for example, that the implications of the colonial massacres and the crimes are right now haunting the Algerians. For example, the nuclear wastes in Regan. This is a very important file that should be opened, and some military documents should be declassified to know the truth about what happened in Regan and what happened during many massacres. I mean, the positive statements and the symbolic moves are not enough. Now, what Algeria is demanding is very clear. Colonialism was an evil enterprise, and it left a lasting and very negative impact on the Algerians. The French establishment needs to come to terms with this past and recognize the crimes and the massacres, and present a formal apology so that we can build on a new relationship on a solid ground. The reasons why the French are reluctant are very complicated, and one of the main reasons is that this colonial mentality is still persistent. I think personally it is still alive, and sometimes the French politicians deal with independent sovereign countries in the Maghreb region and North Africa as still colonies. That's why I think that these moves from the part of Paris are just symbolic moves, and what we want is more than this. There are some French politicians who expressed openly their disappointment about what they call this clinging of Algerians to history. They say, why do Algerians cling to history? And in many times they said that maybe the coming generations will be less bound and less attached to their history, and then relations can improve. And I think the moves from President Tebboune to institute a Day for National Memory and to open a public TV channel on memory is the best response to the French. We are not going to forget. To build a strong and sound future, we should establish.
And speaking of future, Mahfoud Ali Zoui, speaking of the future, I would like to announce what's coming up next because we're running out of time. So coming up next in our discussion, relations between France and Algeria have witnessed many ups and downs since Algeria's independence regarding all the efforts bring to the two countries together. The memory file and French colonization crimes neglection in Algeria has been the main barrier to pave the way for better ties. More insights about the diplomatic ties between the two countries, I'll leave you with this report by Islam Said.
Relations between Algeria and France have been swinging back and forth since the independence in 1962 and never seen light to cope with all the past struggles, including crimes committed against the Algerian people during the French colonization. In 1971, Houari Boumediene, the president of Algeria at that time, announced the nationalization of gas pipelines and 51% of the assets of French oil companies. Paris reacted by a decision to end its privileged relations with Algeria. The years 1975 and 1981 marked two official visits of two French presidents to Algeria as an independent country. The visits aimed at soothing tensions between the two countries and in search for better relations and cooperation. On the other hand, in 1982, Chedli Benjedid went to Paris for the first time as the first Algerian president visited France. In 2003, France and Algeria signed the Algeria Statement, which provided exceptional partnership to overcome a past that is still painful for many Algerians, which should not be forgotten or denied. However, the announcement of a law on the colonization positive role dragged relations down again in 2005. A year later, controversial section of the accord was repealed by decree, and Algeria required an official apology for the crimes committed against its people to sign a treaty of friendship. Seeking better relations without any regretted apology was the main title of the French President Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007 in his visit to Algeria. However, 6 years later, The next president, François Hollande, admitted the suffering inflicted by French colonization on the Algerian people. In 2021, the current French president, Emmanuel Macron, announced that he would take emblematic measures to soothe tensions, and once again without any apology, calling the crimes against the Algerian people unjustified, and doubted the existence of the Algerian nation before the independence and the memory file after the independence. In the same year, 2021, President of the Republic Abdelmadjid Tebboune criticizes France's failure to officially recognize the war crimes against humanity that is committed during its colonization, and emphasized that France should show full respect for Algeria and its people. Amid all the situations, the Algerian-French relations have returned to point zero after many attempts to mend the relations and to bring the two nations together, overlooking all the unforgotten past events.
Unfortunately, we're left with very little time to discuss further the thorny file between France and Algeria. But I would like to give final words to Dr. Emmanuel Pouchelet, President of the Republic Abdelmadjid Tebboune, on Thursday had a telephone communication with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, during which he reiterated his congratulations for his re-election as President of the French Republic. How do you see the future relations of the two countries? Will the diplomatic and economic ties between Algeria and France change after the re-election of Macron? Very briefly, please, Mr. Emmanuel Pouchelet.
Yes, I will have only 2 seconds. Of course, we will have new relations, but I think it's not will be only Mr. Macron, but it will be Europe, and maybe Europe through Mr. Macron for the new relations with Algeria. This is the future of the French and Algerian relations, I think.
Very nice. Professor Abdelnour Toumi, how do you see the future relations of the two countries? Can we speak of bright, stronger economic ties?
That will be indeed, and let's keep it on a positive note that, especially again, in the ongoing war in Ukraine, and France now needs Algeria and also Algeria also has a good card to diversify its diplomacy. But on the last word will be, as President Tebboune stated, memory will not forget.
Thank you, very nice. Dr. Mahfoud Ali Zoui, any final word about the possibility of stronger political ties between the two countries? Ali Zoui? Apparently we don't have Dr. Ali Zoui. Thank you, dear guests, for being with us in this very vivid discussion about the memory file of Algeria. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News with me, Karim Fazakari. That's the end for now.